Foreign Affairs, Ambassador David Prendergast, Director, Sectoral Program Directorate for Economic Integration, Innovation, and Development, Caricom Secretariat. And of course, our moderator, Dr. Pauline Yearwood, Deputy Program Manager, Transportation Directorate of Economic Integration, Innovation, and Development, Caricom Secretariat. And of course, to our presenters, welcome. Thank you for attending this webinar, which by the large attendance, we anticipate folks coming in very soon, not only by students, but by industry professionals, shows the Caribbean maritime sector is a key part of regional economic conversation, whether it is about education or global trade. Allow me please to review a few housekeeping rules before I turn over to the moderator. Michael, I need to see the thank you. Remain muted until you are speaking, please, and try to limit external distractions. We ensure that you have the proper bandwidth so that you're able to hear the presentation as well as to make any comments that you'd like to. Utilize the chat function where you will be putting your Q&A, which will be handled by both myself and Dr. Yearwood. And I don't have to say this to this group. Be respectful, be courteous, and most of all, enjoy the webinar. I turn over now to our moderator, Dr. Yearwood.
Good morning, everyone. It is also with, let me say, it is a great sorrow and sadness that we have learned of the passing of Her Royal Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Our thoughts, our prayers are with her, with the royal family at this very sad time, and we send deep condolences. Now, in the context of maritime transport, I wish Her Royal Majesty Queen Elizabeth was a master of the merchant navy and the fishing fleet, an enthusiastic supporter of the maritime sector. And in the context of the cruise industry, she played a role as godmother to two of the company's ships, the Aurania and the Britannia. The UK, as we all are aware, is the host of the IMO, and that is the Intergovernmental Maritime Consultative Organization. This is a specialization in agency of the UN responsible for regulatory shipping, and which was established in 1958. Her Majesty opened the organization's new headquarters in 1983, and she also visited it 2 years ago on its 70th anniversary. So it would be, as I said, I would just wish if the meeting would give a minute silence in her honor. Okay, we'll proceed. Again, so our first matter for the morning is our keynote speaker, Miss Jennifer Nugent-Hill. She is the Director of Government Relations, Tropical Shipping. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Moderator, Dr. Yearwood. It's good to be here.
Before you begin, Mrs. Nugent-Hill, are we going to be hearing from Mr. Sampson?
Sorry.
Disconnect?
I will yield over back to you, moderator. I saw that he was on.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, Mr. Sampson, please.
Mr. Sampson, President of the Caribbean Shipping Association. My apologies there, Mr. Sampson. Mr. Sampson, are you hearing us?
In light of the technical difficulty which we are having, let us proceed, please, to the introduction of Jennifer Nugent-Hill, who will have the joy and pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker today. Jennifer?
It is indeed a joy. It is a pleasure. Good morning, everyone. And again, I am honored to serve today as the person to introduce her, an amazing leader in our region, certainly in her country of Barbados. The Senator Honorable Lisa Cummins is the Minister of tourism and international transportation for Barbados, a friend to all of us in the maritime space, certainly that of the Women in Maritime Association Caribbean. She was the distinguished speaker at the launch of the Barbados Women in Maritime Association Caribbean, and we're so grateful for her leadership in supporting what we're doing. But previously, onto our minister, she served as chairman of the Barbados Port, Inc., and prior to her current government appointment, she served as the executive director of the University of the West Indies Consulting Company, rebranded as Lumen Consulting. A former career diplomat for 10 years from 1997 to 2008, she served at the headquarters of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, where she covered the United Nations and then posted to the Barbados Embassy in Washington, D.C. The Honorable Minister Cummins is an international trade specialist. She was posted in Kampala, Uganda, as lead technical advisor and a member of the negotiating team for services in the East African community, trade talks with Europe, and of course, the EAC Common Market, where she worked on projects in both East and Southern Africa for several development partners, including the World Bank, UNCTAD, the European Union, and Trademark East Africa. Minister Cummins also headed the Barbados Coalition of Service Industries from 2013 to 2018, where she led in the development of service standards for trade in service sectors and was a founding member of the Caribbean Coalition of Service Industries, advised on the implementation of the service chapter, in particular, the free movement of persons of the Economic Partnership Agreement of the Caricom Forum, EU, and served on the national negotiating team for services and investment in Caricom, very important role, the Canadian trade negotiations. Minister Cummins currently sits on the advisory board of the Trinidad Rampal Center for Trade, Law, and Policy. She is the chair of the Caribbean Tourism Organization and the vice president of the United Nations World Tourism Organization, known to most of us in industry as UNWTO, the Commission of the Americas. The minister is holder of an undergraduate degree in international relations and diplomacy from UWI Mona campus, University of the West Indies Mona campus, a master's in science in international trade policy from UWI as well in Cave Hill, and a postgraduate certificate holder in professional education from the Harvard Kennedy School of Public Policy in public-private partnership. I am so honored to introduce our dear minister, a trailblazer for us in this industry, and one that I think has great hope and desires to reshape the international transportation in our region, but equally as important in the world. I welcome you, Minister Cummins. It's an honor to have you, and we present you to our large audience this morning of students and others in our maritime industry. Please welcome, Minister.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Nugent Hall. It is my absolute privilege to be here with all of you today. This has been an absolute privilege to join the discussion this morning with all of the illustrious partners that are here. And I also never miss an opportunity to talk with students and young minds who are like myself when I was in their position, looking forward to seeing where my own career trajectory will take me in my chosen area of education. And I would not have missed this opportunity. So thank you all very much for inviting me. I want to begin by recognizing the president of the American Caribbean Foundation, Ms. Genevieve Brown-Metzger, Mr. Mark Sampson, president of the Caribbean Shipping Association. I've already acknowledged Ms. Jennifer Nugent-Hill, director of government relations with Tropical Shipping, our moderator from the Caricom Secretariat, and a former colleague in the government of Barbados, Dr. Pauline Yearwood, Mr. Emerson Allen, who is the former executive vice president for the Shipping Association of Barbados and now serves as a consultant. Of course, I want to recognize our students and our distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my absolute privilege to address you this morning at this webinar. I want to thank the ACMF for inviting me this morning. I want to, first of all, recognize the work of the foundation for this innovative forum for the purpose of knowledge sharing, but also relationship development. Forums like these play a critical role in the preparation of students to work in all spheres of the maritime industry. And today I'm going to share a little bit about what some of those opportunities look like and what some of the spheres of the past and the present look like, and what I'm hoping the future will look like for all of us. I want to take the opportunity also to recognize the partners of today's webinar, the Caricom Secretariat, the University of Trinidad and Tobago, and of course, the Women in Maritime Association Caribbean Chapter, WEMAC. I was proud to be at the launch of the Barbados chapter of WEMAC and to be the first recipient of the Women in Maritime Award just last year. But together, all of you, the Caricom Secretariat, the University of TNT, the Women in Maritime Association, all of you collectively and individually have played an important role in creating a harmonized regional maritime structure for the benefit of all who wish to work or engage in leisure activities. And so for today, we're talking about the benefits of the maritime industry in its entirety, including cargo and cruise. We can agree that this sector that we lead is fundamental to a nation's socioeconomic development. And that is in particular the case for small island developing economies like ourselves, who are primarily reliant on the importation of goods. Efficient, reliable, low-cost transportation provided by ships, they provide essential commodities to our region. Cruise ships bring visitors to our shore, and fishermen and water sports operators ply their trade in our waters. It is a vast and an immense sector, and participants at sea and on shore are required to be able to be skilled, trained, reskilled, retooled, retrained, and redeployed. One of my own goals and one of my own priorities as minister with responsibility for the sector is the development and implementation of new training programs resulting in a cadre of competent maritime professionals who are qualified to work anywhere in the world. And I expect that the students to whom we're speaking this morning will be among that cadre of professionals who will work here in our region to serve our countries, but who will also be our ambassadors as they are deployed all across the globe. Programs like the ones under the umbrella of our partners here have the potential, quite frankly, to effect national economic growth. But for you, the individuals who are building careers now and expanding your scope, you have the opportunity to explore your options in this dynamic industry. But I'm also calling on all of you to be among the next generation of innovators and problem solvers to help shape our future. Now, the delivery of maritime education and training in primary, secondary, and tertiary academic and vocational institutions help us to ensure that the pool of qualified and competent professionals for the shore-based and seagoing maritime sectors is sustained. But we must always be current and responsive to the developments of the maritime industry. There is very much an ever-evolving environment which is impacted by digitalization and decarbonization. Technological developments, including new digital technologies, and of course, we are in the fourth wave of the Industrial Revolution. These things are collectively reshaping the industry as we have always known it. The industry of 10 years ago is not the industry of today. The industry of 20 years ago is not the industry of today. The industry of 50 years ago is most definitely not the industry of today. And we are looking to all of you to help to shape the industry of our future while we adapt to the industry of our present. Maritime transportation is a specialized field, and the role of the IMO and its conventions on standards for training, certification, and watchkeeping are all critical for the development. We have the benefit of the World Maritime University. We also have the IMO International Maritime Law Institute, and many nationals have attended these institutions and come back home or gone across the globe to take up maritime positions in the public and private sectors. I'm also proud to be able to see that all across the region, there are any number of tertiary level institutions that have followed suit. And here in the region, we have the CMU, formerly the Caribbean Maritime Institute in Jamaica. I did have the privilege a few years ago of engaging with the CMU. We have in Trinidad and Tobago the Institute of Marine Affairs and various maritime specific programs of study at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, one of our partners today. And in the Northern Caribbean, we also have the LJM Maritime Academy. In Guyana and the Cayman Islands, we also have institutions that are there, and the majority of these partners are also academic partners of the ACMF. Here in Barbados, I give the commitment that we too will continue to support our tertiary level institutions across the region. I think it is clear, especially with the partnership of the Caricom community, that it is critical that we leverage our resources across our regional institutions and to take advantage of the free movement and free circulation of our people for the purposes of education to ensure that we develop the institutions that are already there. Barbados is also, however, seeking to build on the specific expansion trajectory that we have set for ourselves with the introduction of new maritime training programs, not to compete with that which is already there in institutions which we fully support, but to be able to augment and to take us in a direction that is going to position Barbados, as we have already been working in our aviation sector and in our maritime sector, as a logistics hub for shipping and for aviation collectively, treating to the international transportation objectives of a small island developing state in a coherent and a cohesive manner. So institutions across our region, not just here in Barbados, must become the centers of excellence for maritime education and training. Through our centers, we can and must produce a cadre of knowledgeable, skilled, and competent human resources all across the maritime sector. We must ensure that the output of human resources continuously aligns with changing maritime industry needs. We cannot stay with what we always knew. We have to evolve into what the industry needs now and where the industry needs to go next. Our region must never, our countries must never, our institutions must never be afraid to lead. We are that region of the world which is most affected by many of the changes affecting the maritime industry, and as such, our voices must be in the vanguard of the leadership of its development in all incarnations. We must ensure that maritime knowledge remains tied to maritime practice. We must ensure that we build a maritime workforce that has a skill set to embrace the economic, the environmental, the social, and technological advancements in the industry, but across our wider economies. But while we have regional and international training institutions in the way that I have just described, it still falls to us, those of us on the call, the leaders who represent the various institutions, those of you who have spent your lifetime devoted to the development of this industry, and those of you who are coming behind and now beginning your own journey. It still falls to us to raise the profile of the maritime sector as an option for persons where they can have a fulfilling and a rewarding career as individuals. I'm aware that various factors influence how many people enter the workforce. We have challenges with our educational system and access. Do we have enough people? Do we have enough places in our institutions? Labor market conditions, and sometimes sociocultural and individual lifestyle preferences. I'm also aware that in many cases, there is the lingering perception that maritime-related jobs, in particular seafaring, can be hard and difficult. And certainly over the last few years, certainly the last 2 years, beginning in 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic, we all saw the challenges that seafarers faced and the challenges of being stranded at sea and being unable to get home. I am proud to represent a nation at the time as the chairman of the port and now as Minister of Tourism with also responsibility for cruise, that we welcomed seafarers here to Barbados, and over 22,000 people, seafarers and passengers, were able to be repatriated to their homes via Barbados after many countries found difficulty dealing with the novelty and the fear of a pandemic with opening their doors. We then recognize the importance, and many people have seen the challenges that seafarers faced. But this is now an opportunity for us to evolve and to treat to those challenges in a way that, one, ensures the protection of seafarers, and two, continues to attract seafarers into the industry. Many of our countries are partners of the IMO, and you have given attention to some of these issues, including things like the Seafarers Bill of Rights. And we are proud that here in Barbados, we are committed to new legislation which speaks to these kinds of issues. Now, I don't want to just speak about the legislative framework and the partnerships and so on. I want to spend a few moments in the second part of my conversation as I come to the close of my address to speak to you about sustainable maritime sector building and what is required by all of us. There is a role to be played in the development and the attraction of maritime infrastructure. There is a role to be played in the development of effective regulatory and legislative programs. I have spoken already about the importance of the protection of workers, in particular seafarers. And I've spoken also about the skilled and competent workforce that is required. I am urging you as students to consider this a sector for your career. I'm expecting that all of the things that I have spoken about, you have already heard about before your journey led you to this stage. But I want to challenge you now. I want to challenge you to come with a new vision for the maritime sector in this region. I want to challenge you to bring a depth of analysis. I want to be able to challenge you to speak to the importance of commercial development. What is the Caribbean's place in the world? We represent a region in the world whose maritime space is larger and more vast than our landmass. What does this mean for the future skills being developed in this region? Will you be the leaders of the future that help us to navigate what the transformed infrastructure of our maritime spaces look like, of our ports, of our shipping industry? Will you be the leaders of the future that develop new skills and new technologies that lead to innovation and transformation? Will you be the leaders of the future that navigate the space of international relations and the development of international policy at the level of the institutions to whom I have spoken, including the International Maritime Organization? Will there be a space where you are the ones that are leading the conversation on new commercial models being developed for our cruise industry, which is highly vertically integrated, and in some instances, not necessarily contributing to the levels that we would like to the domestic economy? Are you going to be among the cadre of those who come in our future to ensure that the level of connectivity for our cargo partners will never be disrupted and face the kind of supply chain interruptions that we faced as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? What will be our future as charted by all of you? I am absolutely looking forward to ensuring that in my role as minister and with all of you as the leaders, that we shepherd a way forward for you as new students to position this Caribbean region at the forefront of every maritime conversation. The region must be in the forefront of the vanguard of agitation on issues relating to the climate crisis, sea level rise, and all of the challenges that I have just raised before you. But we must also be in the vanguard of the exploitation of new opportunities which those challenges present us with. You are required to be the nation's problem solvers. You are required to be this nation's leaders. And I am committed to serving in every possible way to ensuring that you are the leaders of the future. I am looking forward to working with you in any way that I can and working with all of our institutions. I wish you every success in the future, and I look forward to a productive morning with you and a future that is going to be led by you.
Thank you, Minister, for that sounded to us. What I'm saying here, Minister, that the mandate that you have given us and the support, our participants at this point, I would say that even from a maritime perspective for us as the region, what the minister just pointed out, it is not the size of the ship, it's the motion of the ocean. And what she has shown us today from what she had said from her present keynote this morning is that we have you all as young persons, we have our leaders and our development being dependent on the maritime sector, and our leaders giving us that full support. So with that, again, Minister, thank you for this resounding and encouraging keynote of speech to our participants. Our next presenter is Mr. Emerson Allen. He is a consultant and former EVP of the Shipping Association of Barbados, and he will speak to us on the job and scholarship opportunities in the maritime industry. This is very fitting following the minister, because it is again going to present you with the opportunities there, of which you all should take opportunities of. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Allen.
Good morning to all. I'm not sure if you're hearing me. Are you hearing me?
We are hearing you.
Yes.
Good morning all. Mr. Cummins, Geneve, President of the ACMF, invited guests, participants. My role is to let persons know about two things: the possibility of jobs in the maritime sector, and secondly, the purpose that the ACMF serves. First, I start with land-based jobs. And I'm talking about the high-end jobs in the maritime field. We're talking about pilots on land. We're talking about pilots. Most ports in the world need pilots to guide ships and ships' captains into their ports. And that is very important in many countries and many ports. Then we have engineers who would maintain the pilot launches and the other marine vehicles, tugs, etc., on a regular basis. So those are two important land-based areas in which individuals can be highly trained and be occupied in the marine sector. We can go then to cargo. I'm told that 90% of cargo is moved around the world by ships. And therefore, these ships need people to work on board, beginning with the captain who is responsible. We're talking about the first officer, second officer, chief officer, third officer, a whole long list of officers at the top of that chain in the cargo area. And then we can go and look at what cruise ships need. Again, captains or masters, we're talking about first officers, chief officers. Then you talk about entertainment, you can have a cruise director, staff captain, safety officer, chief engineer. You have doctors on ships and nurses. So that we're talking about areas in the maritime sector in which training is available in various parts of the Caribbean for persons to get that training and then to find worthwhile jobs with good pay in these areas. And then, of course, we could talk about yachts. The yachting industry is a big one, with multi-million-dollar ships crossing the seas of the world. And they pay, as far as I'm told, they pay very well to well-trained staff. Therefore, it is not only a case of being land-based or on a cargo ship or on a cruise ship, but these multi-million-dollar yachts for which the owners pay good sums to have qualified and competent staff, whether captain or officer or even serving on the yachts. So what we want to do at the ACMF is to find ways, and we have found some ways, to increase the number of persons who get an opportunity to study at the various institutes around the Caribbean. The Caribbean Maritime University, as the minister said, was once the Caribbean Maritime Institute, of which I was a director for about 12 years. The only non-Jamaican on the board at that time, and probably still is the only non-Jamaican on the board, or ever on the board. That institution has been around for some time, and the purpose of that institution is to prepare persons for the world of work. Therefore, when you leave that institution, you're pretty sure that somewhere along the line, you're going to be recognized as competent, and it's then left to you to do what you're required to do. We have the University of Trinidad and Tobago that came in since then, and we are also providing training or course of training for these individuals. We don't provide training, but we do provide for the cost of training by giving scholarships and grants, as the case may be. So I want to say to you, opportunities are there in the maritime sector at the highest level, and therefore I urge you to take the opportunity to apply where necessary. If you want to be in the maritime field and you want to be well trained, I urge you to apply to the ACMF, where there is a committee that looks at the applications and decide on whether you get a grant or a scholarship so that you can pursue a higher education and therefore earn what we consider or what is considered to be good money in the maritime field. With that, I want to thank you for listening to my short presentation.
At this point, Dr. Yearwood, we both are going to, well, thank you, first of all, Mr. Aline, and thank you very much, Minister Cummins. I cannot tell when last I've heard such an impassioned, thoughtful, and evocative presentation on the Caribbean maritime sector. And to be followed by an outline of the kinds of opportunities, it is just incredible to hear this. We are going to now be moving to the Q&A period, and I see there are some questions in the chat. The moderator and I will be sharing this function. We have set aside a good 15 or 20 minutes for this session, and questions, of course, will be coming to all of the speakers. Pauline, if you don't mind, I'll start with the first one. The first comment we got that, and I suppose it's directed to the minister, is that we need to do more to protect our seas. Minister, you mentioned the IMO, of which I'm sure that's a huge part of their remit. Could you say a little bit more about what we are doing in the region to protect this asset?
Thanks for the question. I did see it in the chat, and I agree with you 100% that we do have to protect our seas. So we have obviously, and Barbados was not spared this a few years ago, where as a result of having vessels along the coastline, that there was some damage to our reefs. And so the importance of the protection mechanisms for our ecosystems and our marine ecosystems is really going to be critical for all of us. And then enforcement mechanisms as well. There are any number of international pieces of legislation that provide for the protection of the marine space, and they include IMO regulations as well. And we have a number of domestic legislative protections that have also been put in place to ensure that there is the protection of our ocean space. Now, I think one of the things that we also had to be clear about is that certainly, and I wear the dual roles of tourism and international transport. Now, protecting our oceans also has meant that a lot of our tourism infrastructure is along our coasts. And so we have the combination of ocean-based protection mechanisms are being derived from ships, both cargo and cruise, and then land-based sources of pollution being derived from land-based activities. We have seen over the years, however, a number of impressive transformations that have taken place currently with the cruise ships in particular. We are already having conversations all across the industry about the changes to cleaner types of energy. And so we're talking now about shore-based power. We're looking also at LNG, and ultimately the expectation is that we will transition to hydrogen over time. There was a time where waste was dispensed at sea, affecting the ocean in ways that we never would have wanted. That has also been transformed over the years. And so the industry on the one hand, countries on the other hand, and at the umbrella level, the international and the regional institutions as well are also playing a critical role in ensuring that the protection mechanisms are in place, and that where they are not followed, that they are enforced, and that there are consequences for the failure to protect our oceans and our maritime space.
Thank you very much, Minister. The next question, I think, could be to both you, Minister, and Mr. Lean, but I'll start with Mr. Lean. Do you think that the Caribbean can become one of the largest suppliers of maritime workers in the world? And what must be done to achieve this goal? And then, Minister, I'd appreciate if you'd weigh in on that as well. Mr. Lean?
I would think it's almost impossible for us to be the leader because of our small population. But what I can say is that I believe we can have the best trained workers to work on board ships. And that's one of that I believe that should be our main. But with our small population throughout the Caribbean, I don't think it is possible to have the largest number of workers in that area. But we should have the best trained and the best, not only trained, but the best behaved, and so on. I think that's where we can stand out in the world.
And of course, we all know of this shortage of officers that has been an issue now for almost a decade. And certainly with the pandemic, that's become even more of an emergency situation to get this cadre of professionals. Minister, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on the question.
So I think there are two elements to this question. We actually do not have the population size to be able to be the leader in principle in terms of volume. I don't know if the Caribbean can compete in volume with the Indonesias and the Philippines and so on of the world. However, there is a different side of this coin, and this is the other part of it. We have, for example, all across this region, tertiary level institutions that are setting up offshore universities for the purposes of medical training. They are not drawing necessarily principally from our population, but they have been able to link educational tourism with the development of skills and training for the purposes of export. And so whether it is all the way up in the Northern Caribbean in Antigua to here in Barbados with institutions like Ross University, American University, and so on for medical training, I see no reason why the Caribbean, with a maritime space and an opportunity for the combination of research and skills development and the capabilities that we have as a historical maritime state. My grandfather and my uncle were all seafarers when I was a child growing up. But I see no reason why we cannot elevate the model to one which then attracts international tertiary level institutions into the region to partner with our existing tertiary level institutions, where the region is producing for the purposes of export the maritime workers of the future, but they're not only just drawn from the Caribbean. That also creates a new economic model where we have an educational tourist in our countries for 9 months of the year at a time, for 6 weeks continuously at a time, for a year or 3 years, however long the program may be, and they are based in Trinidad, in Jamaica, in the Bahamas, in Guyana, all of those institutes that we have already spoken about here in Barbados, where we then become the center of excellence for training for people from all across the world. And they're coming here and benefiting from not just training, but I believe that research and development has to then become the anchor on which our innovation and transformation agenda is then premised.
Very interesting. I have made a note of that. This is an area of particular interest of mine, and I think that it is an unsung opportunity. And Minister, if you don't mind, I'd like to follow up with you on seeing how the ACMF can begin to partner on achieving some of those objectives towards this larger goal. Following on the question of education, I'm curious about this next question, which ties in and makes the point that somehow maritime education institutions are operating under the radar. We all know about UWI, about the law school, the medical school, all over the world. This is a global brand. But we don't know really much about the Caribbean maritime education space. And I must say, that's what excited me years ago when I learned and really realized how important this space was for the region's future. The question is here, how do we make ourselves increase awareness And what else can we be doing to really raise the brand of these institutions, not only within the region, but outside? Minister, if you would try that, and I also ask Mr. Lean to weigh in on the question.
Oh, that's a difficult question, I think, largely because oftentimes we think that the issues that we are facing are unique to us. I happen to have worked in the University of the West Indies. I think you may have mentioned that in the introduction. And many times, even though we all know about the University of the West Indies and we know the programs that it offers, many people really don't have any general idea about what are some of the things that the University of the West Indies does. In the same thing with government, you hear, well, nothing is being done in this space, or no one knows that. And really the truth of the matter is that unless you are functioning in the space, oftentimes the information doesn't always come your way. So I'm aware of the Caribbean Maritime University, for example, because I was the chairman of the port at the time. But if I was not actively involved in something relating to shipping, chances are that may not cross my radar. And so the questions that we have to ask ourselves are related to, one, communication. How do we effectively communicate with a mass-based audience in the public to allow them to absorb as much information as we can make available? How do we ensure that we target the specific audiences that we want to go after, who may actually be interested in the area? How do we then tap into our education system in the tertiary level in particular and the secondary level, so that people who may have a potential interest can then be the beneficiaries of receiving information on what's happening in the sector at the tertiary level? But I don't know if, quite frankly, realistically, any of us know everything about what is out there in things that are not on our immediate.
In our radar, absolutely. It makes sense. Mr. Lean, I know that certainly as one of our strategic partners, that education is very important to the Shipping Association of Barbados. And I know that you have a long history with support of the Caribbean Maritime University. We'd be interested to hear your take on this question of awareness of these institutions and what else can we do to advance their brand.
All right, but when being head of the Shipping Association for some time, many years ago, I think it was about 2008, I was asked if I would sit on the board of the CMI because they wanted to change the name from Jamaica Maritime Institute to the Caribbean Maritime Institute, and it was felt that they needed somebody outside of Jamaica to represent the Caribbean. And that was asked, and the committee management of the association agreed that I could sit on that board. One of the important things at the time was to get the rest of the Caribbean to understand that there was an institution in Jamaica that dealt with maritime training. And throughout the time that I was on the board, and even since it became a university and I was still part of it, my aim was to offer advice throughout the Caribbean on the idea of using the CMU or CMI. I've gone to St. Lucia and I dealt with persons there. I went to Vincent, I met with persons there. I went to Antigua, I met with persons there. And it all had to do with training and how they can get their port workers trained in all those territories. Some of them have since taken up the opportunity to have the workers trained, but some have not. The other thing is that at some point in time, the CMU had an executive director that went all over the place, letting people know about the institution. And his feeling was making connections was most important. And that was his role, making connections everywhere he went, as far as Africa for that matter. We at one point in time, we had students from Peru at that institute. We had Chinese that came from China to that institute. And that was all because of making connections. And I believe that what needs to happen with the institutions in the Caribbean is that they need to make connections wherever connections can be made, and consistently, not now and not later, but consistently making connections. And that's where, as the minister is saying, that we probably can get more people outside of the area, trained in the area, and probably improve on every aspect of the maritime industry.
Absolutely. The power of strategic partnerships. I think that is critically, that's so very important. Continuing with you, Mr. Lean, you spoke glowingly about job opportunities on yachts. And it's a space that I need to learn more about for obvious reasons. We are involved in helping our kids not only get an education, but find jobs. It's all about jobs at the end of the day. Can you elucidate a bit more on the types of jobs that are on yachts, and perhaps even share with us the pay scale for these jobs?
Dave, the pay scale might be a bit difficult, because I remember many years ago, we had a presentation at I think it was the annual general meeting of the Caribbean Shipping Association. And the gentleman came there and made a presentation about jobs on board yachts. And I believe if there were 300 persons in the room, 299 were totally surprised at the kind of remuneration that was offered to persons working on private yachts. I can't recall what those figures are because it was a while ago, but I know that the numbers were staggering. Persons working on private yachts are very well paid, but they must be well qualified as well. And of course, they must be respectful, because the yachting industry, an owner may not necessarily be on his yacht all the time or her yacht all the time, but they may lease or rent the yacht out, and therefore they expect the workers to behave in a way that would stand out and get that yacht going, all over the place with persons on a continuous basis. So that is important, but to talk about figures might be a bit difficult.
I quite understand. Minister, the next question is for you. From your leadership experience in the port industry, what are some suggestions for attracting more women leaders to the industry?
That's such an important question. I think I think that all across the industry over the last 2 years in particular, we have seen that women are equally qualified, women are equally visionary, and in some instances, they are not necessarily being paid at the same scale. That has been a perennial challenge that people have been citing. Equal work for equal pay has been one of the things that we have been looking for. But also, I want to use a personal story. I remember when I was in the diplomatic service, I was a young foreign service officer at the time, and I was the only person who was married, and I'd had a young baby at the time. And I remember at the time having to say to some of my colleagues, I do not want you to choose for me what you think I am capable of doing because you think that I have other responsibilities besides my job. That's my decision to make for myself. And I don't want you to make assertions or assumptions about what you think I can and cannot do. Women navigate the world very differently than men do. And I think that the first thing that has to be that we have to gain our agency and use our voices to say that we make choices for ourselves and that no one is empowered to make them for us. And so for me, the first thing for the maritime industry is that we have to not assume that because women have children or women have families, that they are not willing to be on a cruise ship for 9 months or on a cruise ship for a year. We have to be able to give women those choices where they're making those decisions for themselves. Secondly, having made those decisions for ourselves, then there has to be an accountability on the part of workplaces to ensure that women do not have to feel as though they're choosing between being a professional for which they have trained and invested time and energy and sacrifice, and then being the parent that they are also important, that is also important to them. And so here, for example, in our own ministry, one of the things that we are doing now in tourism, because we run a 24-hour industry on the tourism side, for example, we don't want people to have to choose. And so one of our priorities is ensuring that there is what we have described as a new deal for female workers in the industry, where they feel as though they never have to choose between being a parent and a professional. And that is for us to be able to have that agency, but also for those who work around us to be able to understand you do not have the power to make choices for us. And I think those two things, when combined, will then empower a lot more women to say, I feel confident that my industry recognizes and sees me as a professional and all of those things. And I do not have to choose between being a professional woman, a mother, a wife, a woman, because there is no man in the room who is asked to choose among those things.
Very interesting. No, they don't get asked. The presumption is
They don't
that
get asked that question.
they have agency. So, right, exactly. This next question is for both Minister and Mr. Lean. How should we prepare our next generation of students coming out of university for all the challenges in the maritime industry? It's a very broad question, of course. Ms. Minister, could you take a crack at it first?
Sure. I don't think, quite frankly, that I would be even specific to this industry. I think that we're now in a time and a space where, you know, people are dealing with a lot. People have dealt with a lot. The last 2 years, I think, have changed so many people almost irreparably. And so there's a sense of vulnerability and unsurety about the world we live in and whether or not, you know, things are what we always knew them to be. I think we have to first tell people that they're not what they used to be. It's not the old normal isn't going to return. A new normal has been forged, and it's going to require grit, determination, some guts. It is going to require pushing hard, pushing against doors that sometimes are not open to us and not made available to us, but it is going to require persistence. But it is also going to require analysis and depth and innovation, because we now have to be able to chart the paths that are there. I think we also have to be able, quite frankly, to teach and to integrate things like emotional intelligence into a lot of what we do, because sometimes very little about this is about the substance of the issue, but it is how we handle the things that are before us. Do we take limes and make lemonade, if I were to use a parochial phrase? Or do we then camp out at the fact that we've gotten limes when we wanted oranges? You know, a lot of this has to really be about integrating into our professional competencies and our leadership development, simple things, but which are critical, like emotional intelligence. And I think that this region, these persons who are now coming into the space will be able to conquer the world. And I use an example of an American, for example, an American traveler, anywhere you go in the world, you know there's an American on the train, you know they're on a plane because you hear their voice. They speak with a level of confidence and assertion that we as Caribbean people need to own as well. And so I think that the confidence that is required from us is within us. It is absolutely within us. And our people can go anywhere and they can do anything and they can lead any institution, and our people are the best anywhere in the world. I have that confidence, and I think we have to have it too.
It's very interesting you said that. I had the privilege of speaking at the CMU orientation a couple of days ago, and I wish we had had the conference, this meeting before, because I would have borrowed some of your points. But it was on the notion of soft skills. You know, we don't have issues generally with our level of competence in terms of getting good marks. Our kids are smart, they're hungry, they're eager. But we do have issues in terms of their levels of confidence, the grit that you spoke of, what I like to call the soft skills, which are really not quite so soft. Emotional intelligence, adaptability, understanding teamwork, and that sort of thing. I know that Mr. Lean, being now retired from his senior post at the Shipping Association of Barbados, has put in many decades working with students, and who really, I think, has an understanding, certainly from the perspective of someone who has been in the space for as long as he has. And I'm just very curious to hear hear his thoughts on what our kids need to be doing and how we engage them more effectively in the maritime industry. Mr. Lean?
Ooh, how do I answer that one? I thought that the minister said as much as could be said on that. But the other thing is that we talk qualified and all that. But then there's some things that seem to be missing when persons do leave university and so on. And it seemed to be a bit difficult to communicate properly. And maybe customer service, you know, and I think they need to recognize that everybody's a customer, whether you don't have to be a salesperson and somebody walk in the shop for you to be conscious of customer service. Customer service should be part of you every day. Everybody you meet, you can see them as a customer, and therefore the way you respond is important. Mm-hmm. I think that's what's missing. I'll tell you something. I remember some years ago, I was walking from the car park to the office, and this schoolboy said, "Good morning, sir." And I was shocked. It took me a few seconds before he responded, because that is no longer the case. And I think that's one of the things that's missing with young people. They don't seem to recognize that it's important that everybody around you is a customer. And then again, my own experience, I played cricket for many years and played against schoolboys. And schoolboys would say all kinds of funny things. And I would say to them at the end of the day, but you know, you may walk in my office one day and ask me for a job. So be careful what you say to people when you're playing cricket or when you meet them. These are basic things. And Genevieve, you call them soft skills? Right. You can call them soft skills, but these are some of the things that whether you have a degree or otherwise, you have to learn that everybody around you is a customer and you need to treat them as they deserve to be treated. And that's properly, because you never know where that is going to take you.
Yes, I think the minister's comments were really fulsome. However, we can't say enough on this subject, because I find as a foundation head that is the biggest challenge I see with our young people. They're brilliant, but these skills are areas where we perhaps we need to provide them with more support. Moving on, however, from that, Minister, there is a question here relating to scholarships under the Barbados National Development Scholarship 2022 have included postgraduate maritime studies. However, as part of the requirement, in order to be considered, you have to be between the ages of 18 and 40. How does a person outside that criteria gain opportunities, get access to grants or scholarships? I don't know if this is something you're particularly conversant on.
I may not be terribly conversant on that particular topic, regrettably. The Ministry of Education, they typically would provide a number of different types of scholarships. You have the exhibitions and scholarships offered to students who have just graduated at the level of CAPE, so that's the 18-year-old category. And then you also have those persons who are then getting the benefit of the National Development Scholarships in the category that you just outlined. I think one of the challenges there a lot of times is that they're looking for what would be, I guess those of us on the call may just want to retire and go home, but they're looking for people who are in the prime of their working life or just beginning their careers, 18 to 40, and then beginning to have new opportunities. But I think that there has to be a role to play, and especially in a region, not even in a country, where the conversation is evolving right now about aging populations from Jamaica to Barbados and everything in between. There has to be a role to be played by persons who are above 40 and have a considerable amount a single amount to contribute to our regional's development, including in the maritime space. What that looks like, I am not certain, but whether we look at the international types of scholarships like the Chevening, Fulbright, and so on, they're all age limited, I believe below 40. So there perhaps may need to be an opportunity for us to look to see what further skills development may be available for persons that are above that age group.
We could go on with this discussion. It really is remarkable how much there is to learn and certainly to know, and from these two experts that are here. However, we're coming to the end of our program, and if I could ask our moderator, Dr. Yearwood, to close off this part of the program, and then we can go on to the the official close and vote of thanks. Dr. Yearwood?
Yes, once again, this was very engaging here. And I want to, but just before I close, I want to touch on two matters because, of course, I had my grounding in maritime, and of course, I'm also in a similar sector, aviation. And as we were speaking there, I saw so many, challenges, the same situation here. But I want to make a point to the participants about the concern of the sector, and you can look at it in the context of other areas of training. Example, if you are studying law, you can look at concentrating on maritime law, so that at least that also enhances the sector. The yachting sector, I was so excited about that because I want to say something. There are universities, take for instance, if you're undertaking architecture, they need, you can have that as a concept, as an area. You can look at yachting designs. You can even in the same, in the scale of carpentry and so, that decoration you see on the decks and so of the yachts, those are areas that we can use. So we have to look at now marrying certain sectors of the educational environment into these sectors like aviation and maritime and so on, where those skills could be marred. Take, for instance, sales, yacht sales. That's a big industry, and that is done in the context of same again architecture. And for the artists, look at what is the artwork that some of these vessels like to have to identify them. So these are areas I wanted to close with that. There were some questions that also point to us where they asked, one person had also asked about saying that some of the regional governments are not acceding to the international treaties. I would wish to say that that is being addressed from the regional, from underneath the Caricom construct, and in the, taken from the governmental level. So it's not fair to say that not acceding. It is the case where, as I said, we are working assiduously on correcting this. And of course, the governments are working with other agencies and institutions to address the concern, because we take this very seriously, understanding that it is an area, it is a regulatory based industry. So with that, I would like to thank the minister, and also this was very, very thoughtful, provoking and interesting discussion this morning. And I'll pass, in closing, the closing and vote of thanks to Dr. Brown-Mazer. Thank you.
Not hearing you, Jen.
Pardon, thank you. We are keeping our time. Thank you, Dr. Yearwood. We're keeping our time. It's now 12:04. We promised we'd let you out by 12:05, 12:10. Let me take this opportunity to thank our academic partners, our strategic partners, our presenter, the Honorable Lisa Cummings, our moderator, and our strategic partners, the University of Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean Shipping Association, the Shipping Association of Barbados. I really wanted to highlight a couple of points that the minister made, powerful points. The Caribbean at the forefront of maritime discussion globally. Being a vanguard to be able to exploit the new opportunities presented by the industry. These are two powerful points and areas that I think certainly organizations like the Foundation ought to be thinking about how we can support and advance those objectives. I also would like to note that we have had participants from Trinidad, Jamaica, Dominica, Barbados, Guyana, Anguilla, Antigua, and perhaps others that I did not register on the chat by way of their questions. So this webinar indeed reached across the region, and that is the way we intended it to be. This is our third webinar, and I am happy with the success of these series, and we will continue it hopefully in partnership with the Caricom Secretariat going forward. And I thank you all so very much for attending today. Cheers, God bless you, and see you next year.